All right, so we're gonna start right at the top. It's Shlach, Chelik Yud Ches, Sicha Gimel, the third Sicha, right? So it's a Shein Geret Filmo. We've spoken many times about this. As Pirush Rashi al Torah Hagam is a kumt mefarish zayin b'pshuta shel mikra. Rashi came along to give us the simple explanation of things in the Torah. So Rashi allein is magish kama v'kama pamim gleich in the erste sedra. As Rashi himself said many times, and in particular in the very first Rashi, he says exactly that. He says, "Listen, I only came here to give the simple explanation." So however, it also contains Rashi's Pirush on Torah also contains amazing things, incredible content. Von der andere Chilkei Torah. Von der andere Chilkei Torah. There's amazing things and wonderful content that he also brings from the different aspects of the Torah. Even the secrets of the Torah. So Rashi, really to understand Rashi goes through and answers, and his answer will explain through every level of Pshat, Remesh, Josh, Sud. You can get everything, and this is why the Vert von Alten Rebbe as Pirush Rashi of Chumash is Yenush Torah, and this is why the Alter Rebbe calls Rashi Yenush Torah, the wine of Torah, because it's Pshuta Shel Mikra, it's the simple explanation. So it's like grapes, but if you out of grapes you can get wine, which is the juice inside the grape that has an intoxicating effect. You know what I mean? So like side, you can get all of it from the grape, from so that's Rashi. Norbich de zu kennen. Der Grund haben sich zu den Yonim Mufloyim und jenische Torah in Pirush Rashi, muss man früher durchlernen und verstehen in Pirush HaPoshet. In order to get to the wine and the deeper levels of Rashi, you have to first understand Pshat. Right? So bei euch den Yonim Mufloyim und jenische Torah hat Rashi hereingestellt in sein Pirush like Pshuta Shel Mikra. So because Rashi embedded these other layers and kind of has it woven into the simple meaning. So he gives one answer and you can understand it on all levels based on that answer, right? And so he says, Euch beparsha gefällt mir der Pirush von Rashi, was anhat in Yonim Mufloyim in derech halacha und euch jenische Torah. And so too, we see over here with our parsha, we see spider webs. Anyway, sorry about that. We see over here in our parsha, based on a basic understanding of a halacha, a Rashi, we can get concept in halacha and then go even deeper and understand there's amazing ideas and even deeper to the Yenush Torah, to the side, to the secrets, the beautiful aspects of the Torah, all levels. But first, we have to understand Pshat. So we're going to go through this one Rashi. We're going to look at Pshat. We're going to look at the explanation from Mefarshim on Rashi. And then we're going to go deeper. We're going to dig deeper once we've got a hold on that Pshat, right? So in Hemshech HaKsuvim B'Parsha Senu V'Esret Vert Der Tzelt V'Os Yeshua and Kolev Chovin Gezog Akol Adas B'nei Yisrael B'nei Gedim Arangin in Eretz Yisrael. So in regards to what Yeshua and Kolev, right, the two spies of the 12 that didn't hold like the problematic group, they addressed the Jewish people in response to how the 10 spies, the problematic spies, kind of addressed the Jewish people. So Yeshua and Kolev respond to that, and based on this, what they say, state in pasuk, it says, "Ach b'Hashem altim roidu va'atim atiru esam haaretz kilach amenu heim sar tzilo." Says, don't rebel against Hashem, and you'll have nothing, and you won't fear the nation of the land, because they are our bread, and their shadow of protection has departed from them. Right? So as Rashi matik from pasuk the verter altim roidu on his mefarish, so he takes altim roidu, don't rebel, right? And then he says on his mefarish, V'shuv v'atim atiru. And in return, then he continues the sentences, Al tiru, and you will not fear. Right? V'atim atiru. rather. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi takes, you know how he does these headlines. So he's quoting a pasuk. He takes a headline of what he's about to address from that verse. And the Rebbe constantly points out that you have to be, the Rashi was medayek, he was very specific as to what words from the verse he chooses to put in the headline and what he decides he's going to explain about it and whether it's relevant to the explanation or the explanation is relevant to all the pieces of the verse, etc. And we'll see a little bit of that over here. So he takes al timroidu, don't rebel against, meaning against Hashem, Veshuv, and then he Rashi adds Veshuv, and in return, V'atem atiru, and you will not fear. You won't fear them. So Tarjim Mefarshim. So the commentaries say about this. It says Rashi kum zog as the hemshich hakasu V'atem atiru, that the continuation of V'atem atiru and you will not fear is nit kein bazunderzach. It's not a separate idea, a distinct thing. Nor atiru, rather the don't be afraid, or you will not fear, you won't be afraid, is a toitzah v'natim roidu. It's a continuation, it's a consequence. It's the outcome of not rebelling against Hashem. As oy b'Hashem atim roidu, as if you don't rebel against Hashem, vet zayin shuv, then it'll be that in return v'atim atiru, you won't fear them, you won't fear the nations. So when Rashi's hechrach oif down, it's from the Shinoi HaSeder, and Rashi's proof of coming to this conclusion as to how he explains this is based on it's from the Shinoi HaSeder, is from the distinct way, the change in the order within the sentence structure. And I'm going to show you how. He says, by al timroidu state freer in vemin. The first part, it says al timroidu, don't rebel. Before it says don't rebel, it says in whom not to rebel against. Bahashem, it says ach bahashem al timroidu. Right? So that's who not to rebel against. But then un by al tiru, and then by the second part, you will not fear, state darnoch favemen. It says after this who the subject is that we're not supposed to fear. So by the first part, don't rebel, it starts with the subject of who not to rebel against. And the last part, which is a continuation, meaning don't fear or you will not fear, ends with the subject as to who we're not supposed to be afraid of, right? Es am ha'aretz, meaning the nation of the land. Other from them was a state va'atem unit va'atiru. Meaning he says va'atem, right? It doesn't say va'atiru and don't fear. It says va'atem, meaning and you. It's a continuation. The vav in va'atem is connecting the first part and the second part. So al-tim roidu, don't rebel against Hashem, va'atem al-tiru, and you will not fear them because of this first part, right? Therefore, is Rashi machrichas va'atem atiru is a hemshech and teitzah fun al-tim roidu. So the Rashi holds it's a continuation of the first part, which is to not rebel. So the beer is ober kasha. There's a difficulty in this, in the explanation here. He says, Varum lefi zeh, because according to this, Rashi gedarf matik sein von Pasuk euch dem Wort von dem, afar dem b'Hashem. Und euch de Werte dicke Wörter, weite dicke Wörter, va'atem atiru es am haaretz. If it was really about the structure, then he would have included the whole premise as to why the structure even matters or stands out. The fact that it starts with Bahashem and ends with Es Am Haaretz, it doesn't include either of those. It doesn't use any subject in his headline or in his, not only in his heading, but even in his explanation. He doesn't even mention that. So it's a little bit of a stretch. The Rabbi kind of points out it's a little bit of a stretch, right? Because he says Va'atem atiru es am haaretz. That was the continuation, and then other al kopanim. He could have at least said etc. to sort of allude to the continuation of that, to even point to a subject to let us know that that's what he's basing it on, right? Which he does in his commentary. So from them was Rashi break nit dem Wort by Hashem or nit the weite dicke Werte from Pasuk is moving As ein Herkrach is beikra kopanem nit von Lashon HaKasuv, nor von dem Teichen Inyan Atim Reidu. So from this we see, we can't say it's a good idea, but we have difficulty landing there as to say that it was the sentence structure. So then we could surmise that since it's not based on the sentence structure, which is the only seeming logical explanation as to how Rashi arrived at this explanation of it being a continuation or an outcome or a result of not rebelling, that it's clear that it's got to mean that it's specifically the concept, not the content, right? It's the concept of al tim roidu, the whole concept of don't rebel, leading to not being afraid. It's the concept. It's not the actual sentence structure. So dennoch stellt sich Rashi auf the Werte ki lachamenu heim. So then when he says they are our bread, so we have to look at this over here. Un is mafarish neichlem kalechem. Rashi says we'll consume them like bread. There's nifashtanik. We have to explain this. Was is da Rashi machadish? What is Rashi? What is Rashi kind of bringing to the table here that couldn't just be understood naturally? It says moving bepashas as lachamenu heim benageb and they other maintenance nit as dimensions and in lechem. Nobody thinks that he means that the Torah is saying that the people that live there are literally bread. Nobody thinks that. It's clear that it's not meaning it literally. Nor is an Eisdruck as mevet sein menatseach sein as gring vi essen lechem. It's clear that it's a figure of speech. It's an Eisdruck. It's an expression, right? I eat them for breakfast, or I eat them. You know what I mean? Like it's like saying it's an expression. We'll devour them. So that's what he's saying over here, right? They're our bread. We got this. We're gonna completely consume them. We'll be victorious over them, and it'll be easy like eating bread. So the idach viba the kavana is azer kibush ve'onkom and azoy leicht viachila. If the whole point, on the other hand, is to point out that we're going to consume the nations that live in the land as easy like eating bread or like eating. What's the difference between saying bread and some other food, right? He could have just said neichlem, Rashi. He could have also just said neichlem, we're going to eat them, we're going to consume them. He could have just made it simple. So what's the distinction in saying they are our bread and Rashi saying kalechem, that we're going to consume them like bread? There seems to really be like we're really hearkening on the use of the word bread. So Adarabah, Rashi gedarf mevar zayin neichlem kamaychel b'chlal. Nidav kalechem. He said elsewhere, Rashi, neichlem kamaychel, to consume them like food, right? He said elsewhere. He says somewhere else. He says in Vayetze. He says kol davar meichel karei lechem. In general, we can refer to all meals as bread, it's food. We say lechem as just a word that represents all meals, right? So he could have just said that. So farvos is Rashi matik from pasuk oich devar ki v'alchen is nit mefarish. Why does he add in his heading? Remember, he only includes words from a verse in his heading if he's going to address that word. Otherwise, he doesn't include it, or at least say etc. So why does he say ki? Why does it because lachamenu heim, they are our bread? He doesn't address him saying, or why it says because they are our bread. He says ki lachamenu heim, and then just says neichlem kalechem, we'll consume them like bread. So why does he add it in the heading and not address it? So Rashi sar tzilim, and then afterwards Rashi addresses the phrase sar tzilim, that their shadow of protection has departed from them. Their protection and their strength, and he says that the righteous amongst them, amongst the nations, are dead. That Job, right, the Job, the servant of Hashem who was tested, he dies, and he was a righteous among the nations that lived in Eretz Eretz Yisrael when it was called Eretz Canaan. So he was a Canaani, lived in the land, and he was righteous, but he died. So the merit of the righteous within that nation are gone. That's how he explains that their tzilam, their shadow and shade of protection has departed. Then he says, Dover Acher, and another explanation, Rashi says, that the protection of God has departed from them. Right? So he gives two explanations. One is that the righteous amongst them, which is the merit that protects them from any calamity, has died, right? Or it means that the Tzel Hashem, the protection of Hashem, the shadow of Hashem himself, has departed from them. Those are the two explanations when the pasuk says Sar Tzilam, that their protective shadow has departed from them, right? So darfen verstehen, for was neitigt sich Rashi in zwei Pirushim, and was is the Meile in jedem von sie. So two questions. Why does he bring two explanations? And what's the Meile of each over the other, right? So the Bitter Pirush Rashi, the explanation on this is that Rashi's hechach to learn as va'atim atiru is a teitzah von atim roidu. The explanation that al tiru, don't fear the nations, or you will not fear the nations, is a continuation and an outcome from not rebelling against Hashem, is as follows. Freer wird itself as the meraglim haben geteinet as ha'oz ha'am ha'yeshiv ba'aretz. Before this conversation, when they first get there, the spies, back to the camp, and they tell the Jewish people, they say the nation is strong, they're great. And we saw these people that were huge, they were giants. And we were like grasshoppers, and even to them, they also looked at us like we were tiny little grasshoppers. Yeshua and Kalev don't refute this claim. Yeshua and Kalev don't even speak as to this claim that they were tiny compared to these nations and that the nations were these giants. And Yeshua and Kalev, who are saying, don't be afraid, you will not fear these nations, don't refute those facts which were brought as a proof as to why they should be afraid, right? So stellt sich the kasha, the question still stands. Via Zoe haben Yeshua v'Kalev gaman altiru as ha'ma'aretz nit ongeben the kain tam for vos altiru. They say don't be afraid without bringing and providing any proof or reason as to rationality as to why we shouldn't be afraid. They just say don't be afraid. So the kasha vet noch starker, to strengthen this question even further, it says b'shas v'yashkimu ba'beiker. When in the morning, it says they woke up, and there's a group that woke up and they said, you know what? Let's go on and go into the land of Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu gevarnt. Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, Al ta'alu v'lo ki hamaleki v'aknani. He says, don't go. They will kill you. Amalekim, right? Amalek, Canaan, the Canaanites, they will kill you. So clearly, even Moshe Rabbeinu saw a reason to be afraid, right? So it's Yeshua and Kalev gesagt al tiru. So how could Yeshua and Kalev say don't be afraid? Where are they getting this idea from? Ich darf verstehen, we have to understand mit the Werte bei Hashem atim roidu, when it says in Hashem, don't rebel against Hashem. Haben doch Yeshua und Kalev gemeint zu sagen, as wenn soll Mekayim sein dem eibishten Ziel zu gain kein Eretz Yisrael. If they're talking about I don't rebel against Hashem, the whole point is the discussion on going into Eretz Yisrael. Don't rebel against Hashem. What did Hashem say? Go into Eretz Yisrael. No. So let's go on and go into Eretz Yisrael. So if that's what they were saying, that was the point. Then haben sie l'choyer gedarf reden direkt wegen dem Inyan Prati, gain in Eretz Yisrael. Why didn't they just come right out and just say, let's go in Eretz Yisrael? Why did they do this whole, this roundabout way of trying to get them to go into Eretz Yisrael? And why didn't they just say, listen, Hashem said go into Eretz Yisrael. No, let's go on and get to it. rather. So what's the tvia klolus by Hashem atim roidu? What's the point of just saying, you know what? Let's not don't rebel against Hashem. Why do this roundabout way? Another cautious bavar Rashi mitzayin pirush atim roidu v'shuv v'atim atiru. And Rashi answers this in his explanation, in his wording. Yeshuv v'kolav having gezog as al tiru vetzayin atoitzof unatim roidu. Rashi says, do not fear the nations, isn't continuation and outcome of don't rebel against Hashem. It's true that the nations that lived in the land were very strong, very powerful. And there's reason, according to nature, why you could fear them. Nevertheless, if you don't rebel against Hashem, men that ton was the Eibishter haste, and you do what Hashem asks of you, shuv, then in return is demat nittoken shum art afilu api tevet zum murder haben afilu for a starken fall. Then there's no reason, explanation according to nature, not according to nature, why you should fear anything or anybody, no matter how big and strong these people might be. Und der Fahr haben Yeshua v'kolev gezog b'Hashem atim roidu nit derikt men zog gain kein Eretz Yisrael va b'Hashem atim roidu is mevatet the taina ki az ha'om. Und is the time for was altiru was b'derech memele vet men gain in Eretz Yisrael. So the reason why Yeshua and Kolev said don't rebel against Hashem is because not rebelling against Hashem ensures that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's the reason why Altiru, don't be afraid, don't fear the nation. You will not fear the nation. So they know that if we get this fundamental inyan down and drive it home, then naturally they'll go into Eretz Yisrael. It won't be a question. So instead of just saying, trust us, let's just go, or convincing them about the direct mitzvah of going into Eretz Yisrael, no, let's get something straight. If you don't rebel against Hashem, there is nothing to fear. Once everybody's holding there, nothing can stop them. Or us, I should say, right? So Apizeh is moving. And therefore we can understand in continuation of this, is Rashi Mefarish Kila Chamenu, when Rashi explains that because they are our bread, Neichlim Kalechem, he says, we'll consume them like bread. One, we can, and therefore we should explain lachamenu simply to mean bread, literally. Oberlule pirish Rashi, because without Rashi, votmen getaichen lachamenu hem lachamenu in dem inyan as the kenisa la Eretz Yisrael and the kibush from dem am shaba is mulchrach punkt vilechem. Because without Rashi, somebody might assume that when it says go into the land of Yisrael, don't fear the nation because they are our bread, right? Somebody might think, bread as is generally termed as like a necessity. You need bread. It means food, meal, right? But we use the term bread, that a person needs bread for sustenance. So just like a person needs bread, so too the Jewish people need to go into Eretz Yisrael and need to conquer these nations that are living there in order to resettle the land as a holy land. So one might assume that this connection to bread is based on a necessity to go into Eretz Yisrael, right? Und damit wird gewinn verstandig der Vergleich zu Lechem, Davka und euch den Sinnes Tam, ki lachamenu hem. And you can even more so explain this or understand this to mean that it's the reason for, right? That to use the comparison of bread specifically to give us a reason, especially when we look at the fact that it says ki lachamenu hem, because they are our bread, right? So al tiru es amar others. Valachamenu hem zer kibush uchanisu le'eretz Yisrael is muchrach azoy vilachem ubemele is muchrach az al tiru. To show us that we have to go into the land. You can't be afraid. You have to not fear them because you have to go into the land and settle the land and conquer the nations, just like you have to have bread, right? But vibal daber, as Rashi is mafarer says, va'atem al tiru, is der Fall, was at Timroidu, mit Zadem, was mir geht mit dem Koyach von Eberstedt, kämen doch schon nicht sagen, als der Tam auf Altiru is das, was Lachamenu him, was designed nötig wie Lechem. However, Rashi already gave us a reason and an explanation. Altiru, don't fear them. You will not fear them based on not going against Hashem. That's the reason, not because of it's essential, like bread. So by looking at Rashi accurately and then applying it to the pasuk, you can see that that's not what it's referring to. We already have a reason why we are expected to go into Eretz Yisrael, and it's not because of this necessity. That's not what, at least that's not what this pasuk is trying to tell us. So oich lefizeh, and also according to this Wort gewen schwer, we might have a difficulty. At seinen Doch, die Jiden ausgekommen nach dem 39 Jahr nicht in Eretz Yisrael. The Jews went another 39 years after this not going into Eretz Yisrael. It clearly wasn't that essential, right? Not like eating bread. So the Rebbe Zog Rashi, therefore Rashi explains, Neichlin kalechem, we'll consume them like bread. So the vergleich zu lechem ubediak is nicht beinyan hanechitzus va'hechrach. It's not using the comparison of bread to use like an example of the necessity of bread because you need bread, nor rather it's pointing out like eating, consuming. That will conquer the land in a way of like consuming bread. And was is besteht the maila von achilas lechem, and when it explains this maila of this why it's better to use this term of achilas lechem, of eating bread specifically, that Rashi nit oistaichiv, but the Ben Chamish the Mikra hat the Shein gelernt früher in Parshas B'Shalach. He doesn't explain this why he specifically used bread and not just food, because the 5-year-old student who studies Rashi knows already, because Rashi explained it in a previous parsha, in Parshas B'Shalach. Wo Rashi zog, as lechem was sha'alu kahegen, vet der Eibishter geben der Chiba, unbepanim meiris. Because when we were in the desert, we asked, we wanted bread and we wanted meat. When we asked for bread, that was a reasonable request. So Hashem was happy to comply. Oh, absolutely. And gave with a shining face. He gave happily. When we asked for meat, it was like a complication. It was complicated. It was more, there was drama around that. But by bread, that's a reasonable request. Right? So when it says that we're going to eat them like bread, and Rashi explains we're going to consume them like bread. Verstehen men as das meint, as the Eibishter geben zu Jiden dem Kibush Achilas al-Umeis in an Eifen von der Chiba Ponim Me'iris azoi via Gitzai Lechem. The reason we use bread is because it's pointing out that just like when we requested bread, Hashem not only acquiesced and gave us bread, but he did it happily and lovingly with a shining face. He was happy to give us bread. So too, when it comes to entering Eretz Yisrael and conquering the nations that live there, he's going to do so the same way. Just like he gave us man from heaven, just happily, beautiful man falling from the sky, so too he's going to let us go into Eretz Yisrael. We're going to sweep through, and he's going to deliver the land to us happily, because this is his will. It's not what we want. Hashem said to do it, so the expectation is that we go and do it. Right? And on this he explains not to be afraid, because they are like our bread. Because so too, just like with the man falling from heaven with a smiling countenance and face from Hashem, the same is applied here when we go into the land. So I'm going to get the zwei Pirushim from Rashi in Sar Tzilim. Now, to explain the two explanations of the shadow of Hashem, or the shadow of protection has departed from them, We're going to look at what this means, these two explanations. Is moving the mile from Zweiten Pirush von Ersten von Lashon Rashi Gufa. We can understand the second explanation being the shadow, protective shadow of Hashem has departed from them. That clearly is higher than the first explanation, which was the righteous amongst them who bring about merit to their protection. In Zweiten Pirush sagt Rashi, Tzila shel hamakom sar me'aleihem. Masha enke betchilas hadibur, bei em matik sein, der Wörter vom Posuk, was das ist shaykh beshavet zu beide Pirushim, is matik nar, the Wörter sar tzilam, nit dem Wort me'aleihem, va'abir b'zeh. So when Rashi gives this headline of sar tzilam, me'aleihem, that the protection has departed from them. Rashi's headline is Sar Tzilam, the shadow has departed. And his first explanation, he just goes into it. He says that the righteous amongst them have passed away, right? Eov, Job was their protector or their shield, right? But then when he gives the second explanation, which seems secondary, he says Davar Acher, a secondary explanation. He then says, Me'aleihem. He then uses the word Me'aleihem, from above them, right? Sar Tzilam Me'aleihem, that the protective shadow has disappeared or departed from over them. In his secondary explanation, which he uses the term of Hashem, he's saying that it's the shadow of Hashem, then he brings the word Me'aleihem. So you have to understand, if it's secondary, and seemingly a stronger explanation, and why does he then use Me'aleihem, the full verse, as opposed to his main headline, where he doesn't use the verse? So the Lashon Sar, the word Sar, meaning departed, Ubefrat Sar Me'aleihem, and specifically Sar Me'aleihem, departed from above them, meint as the Zach is weggegangen von wo sie is gewen früher, Me'aleihem, und sie gefindt sich jetzt in a zweiten Ort. Something that is one place and has now removed from that place and is now somewhere else. That's what it means, right? Sar, to depart from, means it was here and it's now not there, but it's somewhere else. Okay? Right? In a zweiten Ort, sie ist da, but sie ist euch später, means it still exists, it just exists somewhere else. So, aber leiten ersten Pirush, however, by the first explanation, ksherim shebahem mesu, that the righteous amongst the nation had died, okay, kumt ois as the tzel is it's the lagamre nita, means that their protective shadow is not, it just doesn't exist anymore. Not just that it's not there anymore, it doesn't exist, right? So, pas da nit the lashon sar, we can't, that doesn't fit with the word sar. Of it departing. And specifically not with the emphasis of to have departed from above them. The Rebbe learned Rashi at Sveiten Peterson. So Rashi brings this second explanation to say as that it means the shadow of protection means the shadow of Hashem. Leuten Peterson is glatik the lashon, and this makes this whole verse and contextually makes more sense now, right? He says, Leuten Pirush is glatik the lashon sar befrat sar me'aleihem. It makes it make more sense. Tzila shel hamakom is alam al da, because the shadow of Hashem always exists. Says doch hineni mekim es brisi itchem ve'ezarachem achreichem ve'es kol nefesh achai. Because Hashem said, I'm making a covenant with you and your descendants and all of creation. And he says, V'rachem avokol ma'asav. And Hashem says, I am merciful over all of my creations, all of my things. It says, Ober sar me'aleihem, oiv ze is das nita, meaning when it says that this shadow of protection has departed from them, it means that mercy that Hashem has over all of his creations has departed from just that nation that's there, right? For whatever reason. Aber ich leit dem ersten Pirush, kann man mefader sein, al kolpanim bedeichek, dem loschen sar me'aleihem, afa pi, as the Pirush says, Tzilon, mer nit tov mitzias, was der Fall bringt im Rashi, wie Yisirim ze, als erste Pirush gedulde kommen. The first explanation, that might be, you can still argue this first point, even if it's kind of in a forced way. Clearly, this is the case since Rashi brought it, and not only did he bring it, this was the first explanation he offered. So Yeshua would call it mitzer zogin sar tzilam. When Yeshua and Kalev, they said sar tzilam, their protective shadow has departed. It's not just referring to this protective shadow that is for them, right? Tzilam, meaning just the righteous amongst them who cause this protection, this merit of protection. Nor them am haaretz. The whole point is to discuss the situation, the status of the nation itself. Oy vemen tzilam, about whom we're discussing the shadow of protection, right? Is magen as vibads is nita vers magen zayin oiv ze is altiru es ha'ma'aretz. The whole point is to explain why we don't have to fear them, right? The ops are lacking. Well, when they're not lacking, why is that? Is it because they have security, or is it because they're holding themselves? Does it matter? They're lacking. Let's roll, right? It's very simple. They're lacking. Let's slide. Simple. We're not worried about what the protection is, what the source of protection is. The point is they're vulnerable. Let's go. So it's doch da nageya nit was es tut sich mit Zilo. It's not relevant, the shadow itself, nor was es tut sich mit Am Haaretz. Rather, it's what's doing with the nation, right? Und therefore haben sie gesagt, sar Tzila me'alehem. That's why it says sar. Let's focus on the fact that it's gone. Whatever it is, it's gone from them. Me'alehem. It's not there anymore. Says nita was zu meire haben farzeh. There's no reason to fear them. Vafun zeh hat sich schein abgetan zer zel chotch beneget Tzila is nit blois sar nor mesu. Not only is it gone, that's why he explains it's dead. There's no shadow for them. It's gone. Nor heyes is das is the deichik. Bring Rashi yoichet zweiten Peterson, because this is a little. You have to work to get that explanation. He brings the second one, the one about Hashem. So Oberkanal eich the Peterson maginim v'chaska. When Rashi explains their shield and their strength, their protection and their strength, hotanart. Says va'adrabe in pashtus aksuvim is the Petersh mistaber yaser. When it comes to the simple writing, the simple explanation in the writing itself, is this explanation is the one that makes sense. As the psukim reden wegen the umes, because the pasuk is referring to the nation itself, right? Is mistaber as mitten vart tzilam, make men zeir itself tzilam there, right? Final the Shlach mem at the end of tzel means there. Them, right? The shadow of them, their shadow, Tzilom. So it means Tzel, Ksherim Shebehem, Nit Tziloi Shalamakor. It's not the shadow of Hashem. Ubefrat, as Dama is glatter, as a Zostein Sar Hatzel. If it was the shade, the shadow, protective shadow of Hashem, it wouldn't have said Sar Tzilim, it would have said Sar Hatzel. The shadow has departed, right? But it doesn't, it's a Sar Tzilim. And therefore, is the Peter's Maginam v'chazkam, that their shield, their strength is gone. The Peter's Harishon va'ikri. Therefore, the first explanation is the main one that Rashi brings. Okay, so from the Inyanim Ufloim, now we get into the deeper explanations, the wonderful idea here. It gets very interesting. Von den Inyanim Mufloim in Peter's Rashi, the zwei Berushim Rashi seinen Talui in the Plukta von Rambam V'Raivid. Goes into the explanation, this halachic discussion between the Rambam and the Raivid. The Rambam was the big, rabbi in Spain. He was a Sephardi, and the Raivid was in France, and he argues against the Rambam often, right? And passionately. So the Rambam says like this. The Rambam paskint, he holds that shchitas akum nevela umetama b'masa, that the slaughtering done by an idol worshiper is not kosher, and it imparts impurity, spiritual impurity. Meaning a non-Jewish person who either is an idol worshiper or they refuse to acknowledge at least the 7 laws of Noah, which just are the 7 universal laws of humanity, right? A person who doesn't want to do these and they worship idols or they go in their own way, or even a ger who does accept the 7 mitzvahs, shchitasa nevela. They slaughter an animal, it's not kosher, right? And I consider this, he says, to be midivrei sefer, meaning a mitzvah derabbanan, meaning a rabbinical decree. So shahari tumas avodah zarah, tumas tikruvta midivreihem. And so he considers also this idea of the avodah zarah, because based on the halachas of avodah zarah, that if you're touching this, if you become tameh. So too, he says he holds that also regarding the slaughter, especially if it was done ritualistically, then you also, a person who, a Jew who touches this animal becomes ritually impure. Okay? So the Ravid argues on this. And he says, so the Ravid is Masig Eifen Rambam, Unzog, and he says, Akum Heim Kebehemis. Idol worshippers have the halachic status of animals, meaning those who follow their desires, right? They don't follow Hashem, they follow desires. So they have this halachic status. Ve'ein mitamin, ve'ein mitamin. Therefore, they don't incur ritual impurity, and they can't impart ritual impurity. As a result, if that's their status, so Rambam saying that they cause something to be impure, Ravid says no, that's not true. As it says that the nation is similar to Lachamor, the donkey, Hein, Goyim, Kamar, Midli, that the nations are like this, they're like a drop in the bucket. There's a bunch of nations. But as Kulam Yisa Ruach V'Choshav Oisam V'Chulam, also Ruach B'Chofnav. And anybody that puts too much emphasis on other nations as it pertains to how we do things, it's as if they're grasping air in their fist. There's nothing to hold. Why would we base what we do based on other people? So Frag the Kesef Mishnah. So the Kesef Mishnah, which is a commentary on the Rambam, he says on Ravid, he has this question. He says, "Vos is done as akum ein mitamin ve'ein mitamin da ret men doch nit wegen der akum zu ze seine mitamin oder nit nor wegen der shchita." We're talking about shchita, the slaughter. Where is this conversation about them, implement or imparting ritual impurity on a food or an animal that they slaughter? Where does this fit into the halachic discussion? So it's Mavar the Rogachover. So the Rogachover, who is famous, he's called the Rogachover Gaon, the genius, right? He's said to have been the Rav who gave the Rebbe Smicha. So it's Mavar the Rogachover. The Asagas HaRavid, and he says a note on the Ravid that says, "When is shaykh as the shchita zal mekalkel zayin unmachen far nevela?" When is it relevant that a person's ritual slaughter could cause something to be considered nevela, not kosher? Davka oib der sheichet is a metzias al pi halacha. Only if they have a status within halacha. Whoever slaughtered the animal has to have a halachic status in order to impart any kind of issue on a slaughter. So, however, if they're like air, if they're just a person who's, they don't have a halachic status, a halachic, metzias, is nitshayich erzal kalya machen. Then it's not relevant to say that they could ruin or spoil something. Und das sagt the Ravid, and that's what. So the Ravid says, that idol worshippers, heim kebehemas. Idol worshippers have the halachic status of animals in that ve'ein mitamin ve'ein mitamin. They don't impart any kind of ritual impurity or even receive it. Ze zayin ruach. They're like wind, heder. They're not there in this discussion. They don't fit. They're not there in this halachic discussion. Right? So is nit shaykh zu sagen, azer shchita soll mekalkel sein und machen for nevela. It's not relevant to even say that they can ruin this. So und der Rebbe learned derived as shchitas akum nevela is as nit weil der akum is mekalkel, nor mitzad dem was shchitas akum is nit kein shchita. So the idol worshiper making an animal become nevela, meaning not kosher, is not because the slaughter of the animal was no good, but it's because it's not considered slaughter. Ubamela is this nevela. It's as if the animal died on its own. You can't eat an animal that is not slaughtered by a kosher sheikhet, a kosher rav, rabbi, slaughterer. Anybody outside of that, perspective or that category that doesn't have at least a halachic status of being a kosher individual is not relevant to the discussion of nevela, shchita, slaughter. It just is as if the animal died. You can't eat it anyway. But to say about the animal that it's now nevela and tameh and ritually impure, the Ravid says this isn't the case. He disagrees with the Rambam. So the Ravid ein metamin ve'ein metamin. So why then the reason that the Ravid says that they don't impart impurity, the lechoyer lefi habir from Rogachover is doch da negeh was is seinen heder ulamai nafkamina was das is in them inyan from tuma davka ein metamin uchule kemen zogin. How can we say the Ravid is bringing the fact that he says that they don't attract ritual impurity and they don't impart ritual impurity, right? And the Rogachover, and based on how the Rogachover explains that, it means that it's as if they're not there in this discussion. So what's the distinction when we know that there are cases and situations where this is an issue, right? We have to say, L'chule alma, everyone knows and agrees, oich l'das ha'rayvit, even the Ravid, seinen da kama v'kama in yonim in halacha was benegez is seinen akum begetter mitzias, where an idol worshiper, not just anybody, but an idol worshiper even does have this status of a mitzias, meaning they have some kind of sway as to the status of a thing. Because even a non-Jew who does idol worship, right? A Jew cannot benefit from idol worship in any way. Void, and there's other examples, right? So the Rebbe can the Ravid nit zogen stam. So the Ravid can't make a blanket statement that as akum heim behemoths that idol worshippers have this general status of animals that follow their the desires. That's because it doesn't apply everywhere. Alamal, it doesn't apply everywhere. The Rebbe is meisif umavar ein mitamin the ein mitamin. Therefore, he emphasizes or adds the idea that they don't attract ritual impurity and they don't impart ritual impurity. He's saying something specific. As it pertains to ritual impurity, there's no difference in their status. The geder heder, it's as if they're not there. Also, it's like grasping air. So therefore, you can't say that the animal itself would impart ritual impurity. So the machlokes from Rambam and Ravid, akum, seine begetter mitzias or getter heder, bringt der Shita sehu, so by akum is shaykh getter hashgacha pratis. Now, since this conversation between the Rambam and the Ravid about the status, halachic status of idol worshippers, and whether or not you could even say that they exist in this sense. Now, it doesn't mean in general, it means specifically about slaughter. However, this is a lesson that can be learned with regard to our Rashi from this explanation. Because Ladas HaRambam, we're going to look at how this discussion fits into other areas, like looking at divine providence, hashgacha pratis. How how involved is Hashem in everyone's life, not just the Jewish people, but the nations and even idol worshippers? How much involvement does Hashem play? Right? So Ladas HaRambam, according to the Rambam, as a Zayin Begeder Metzias, where they do have a halachic existence, I guess, is Gam Heim Hayve Geder Hashgacha Pratis. Then, of course, they have Hashgacha Pratis. Hashem is the divine intervention of Hashem. Hashem has his hand in everything that happens to their lives. Uladas HaRayvet as a Zayin Begeder Heder is by Zay Nitog Geder Hashgacha Pratis. And according to the Rayvet, who says they don't have a Metzias, then you can't say there's Hashgacha Pratis by them. Right? So V'yesh Toimar, as the Tzvei Birushim in Rashi, Tzilam, made Maginam v'chazkam other Tzila Shalamakon, Zainin Talui in Deis HaRambam v'Arayvet. So the whole concept of whether or not the shadow, protective shadow, refers to their protective shadow based on their own merit, or the second explanation from Rashi, which is that the shadow of protection is Hashem, right? The protective shadow of Hashem completely depends on who you hold by, Rambam or Rayvet, in their discussion, right? So, according to this first example from Rashi, the first answer, we would say that it's like Rayvet, who says they don't have a Metzias and they don't have Hashgacha Pratis. We can't say that their protection is the protection of Hashem. That it was by them earlier and now it exists, it's gone from them. This would mean that this would require that they have a true Metzias. And the proof is this is Tzila Shalamakon is Shayach und abgemasten leit zer Metzias bedugmas hatzel kapshutay was ver von dem Adam. This basically is saying that the shadow of Hashem is similar to a real shadow in that it's completely measured to the individual, right? The way you see a shadow, the shadow moves based on what the person does. So too, the shadow of Hashem is based on the movements, so to speak, of the person, of the individual. Und sie seien doch Heder, right? Und wie gesagt, was wird von dem Adam? Und sie seien doch Heder, and so they would have to be Heder, like air. Und wie der Rogachover is Mavara, and as the Rogachover explains, the Fizeh, according to this, is Bazeh Nito Geder Hashgacha Pratis, that according to them being considered Heder, meaning not a Metzias, then they don't have this measure of Hashgacha Pratis, of divine intervention. Is like, then we have to say that according to the Rayvet, the way the Rogachover explains it, that Tzilam, their protective shadow, is like the first explanation, which means it's specific to them, their own protective shadow, which happened to be the merit of their protection based on the righteous that live amongst them, right? But not based on the shadow, the protective shadow of Hashem, right? So but the second explanation from Rashi attaches to them, to this nation in the land, a Metzias. And would say, like the Rambam, where they do have a Metzias, and therefore they do have a divine hand in everything that happens. That it's the fact that we say that there's something specific to them in regards to a protection from Hashem is then referencing on them that they have a Metzias. It's Shaykh zu ze Metzias kanal. So klerer vet das sein verstandig alpi pnimius and yonim. So now to explain it based on Chassidus, to go even deeper, the Pirush from Tzila Shalamakum, the explanation of this protective shadow of Hashem is as the Pa'ulas ha'adam toyin oifa inyan l'mayla b'dugdus b'tzir ha'pa'ula. Everything that a person does causes, like a shadow, the shadow to be in a mirror, in the way of the person moving. The shadow resembles the movements of the individual. So Va'aderech Pirush Baal Shem Tov, and the way that the Baal Shem Tov says al pasuk Hashem Tzilcha, that Hashem is your shadow. As loide in Yonam Vazayid Tut Lamata, that according to the things that a person does down here, Tuan sich oif dugmasum in Yonam Lamaila, they cause the same things that happen on high. Kamashal tzel ha'adam, and he gives the example of the mashal of a shadow of a person. Was lefi oifen hatznuos von dem Menschen tut sich dugmasum mamish ba'atzel, like the movements of a person causes the shadow to do the same thing. So ma'ain zeh is oich tziloi shalamakom, and in a similar way is the shadow, protective shadow of Hashem, b'negeh umas ha'olam, as it pertains to the nations of the world. As is doch eino mekapeach schar kol birya. It said, Hashem said, that he doesn't withhold reward from any of his creations, let alone people and nations of the world, right? So the things that they do draws down a reaction from Hashem on high, right? So Ha'inyan Milamayla is nimshach lamata to ze das heis as b'shas zeitun ha'pa'ula teiva ze zayim mekayim design mitzvahs b'nei noyach v'kuyotz b'zeh. So at the time that they are doing something good for Hashem, specifically doing something that falls within the 7 laws of humanity, Gitmin ze schar, Hashem gives them reward. Und wenn sie seinen Eiver Aveira, and on the flip side, when they do something against Hashem, ver nimshach milamayla atzel, so too draws down some form of shadow or some kind of reaction from Hashem. Inyan dugmas pa'ulosam, something that mirrors the action. Hezek, an einish, some kind of punishment. Something severe. This goes according to the Rambam. We all like the Rambam on this, that they have some kind of mitzias because that leads to them having some kind of schar and a reaction from Hashem when they do anything. So this is why they have this kind of reaction, this like shadow of Hashem, that is a reaction to the things they do. Therefore, we say that they do have a sense of divine intervention from Hashem. However, according to the Ravid, who says they don't have a Metzias, they're like air, is nit shaykh zu sagen as zeyere apoula zol mamshich zayin an inyan dugmasoi milamayla. You can't say that the things they do cause a reaction on high. Right? So he disagrees with the Rambam. Says they don't have Hashgacha Pratis, divine intervention. Lafi shitas haravid is the schar va'onish by umas ha'elam ataytzav was kum b'derech memela b'derech teif from tachlis briyasum. So according to the Ravid, the things that happen to them, whether they be reward or punishment or anything like that to idol worshippers, is really just something that happens naturally. They do something in this world, and so then it just unfolds the way it unfolds for them, right? And since the whole world was created for the purpose of carrying out the Torah, and since the Jews agreed to following the Torah and became his nation, we are the reason why the world was created. The mission is the reason why the world was created, and we're the ones carrying out that mission. Everyone can carry out the mission or do their part to carry out the mission. But if you're not helping in the carrying out of the mission of the Torah, meaning of Hashem, then what are you doing? Or what are they doing? Right? So al derech vi megefint schar va'enish by balei chayim, and we can see as by not looking at Jews or non-Jews or people, just let's look at animals, for example. So was the Torah zog, the Torah says ve'ez habehemis taharegu, an animal that sin was done with an animal, God forbid, right? The animal gets killed. So we ask why. Choj by behema is nit shayach kein chet. The animal doesn't sin. An animal cannot sin. So the question is, why would an animal have to be put to death for a sin that was caused with an animal if they don't sin? So behema machata, what do they do? Nor mipnei sheba'am la'adam takola al yada. Since this animal played some kind of role in a sin that was done at the hands of some person, is doch das nit begeder einish. It's not necessarily a punishment, nor heya is wie the tachlis from brias habehema is to live mishamesh zayin dem adam. Animals are there to facilitate the things that we need in terms of, using them to plow fields and having them to, when they, just the natural, for example, we were talking recently about mosquitoes. Why do mosquitoes have to exist, right? Wasn't that, Eitan, I think you were there for that. And we were saying how they're actually, your friend said that they're like a fundamental part of, the greater, whatever it is, the way that things work in nature, that they're part of the ecosystem, that they have to exist because they're a main source of food and nourishment for this. So everything plays a role. So the minute something no longer plays its part in their role, then they don't have a reason to be here, is essentially what goes on with the animal. Is b'shas the behema is nit mishamish the mention nor sie bringt im noch atakala. Is nit da kein art for a ir mitzias ve'esa behema ta'aregu. There's no need for it to exist now. It's done something that has gone outside of its purpose for being, so it's got to go. Unal derech zeh is the schar va'einish by umas ha'olam. And this is, according to the Rabbi, exactly the same way by schar and einish by idol worshippers. Vibal as the tachlis brias kol ha'olam is b'shvil Yisrael. Since the whole world was created for this mission, and the mission is then carried out by the Jewish people, is muchrach as oich the mitzvahs shenitztavu b'nei noyach is das nit wie the mitzvah shenitztavu Yisrael, was the tachlis is the etzem kiyam ha-mitzvahs, nor is an inyan teifel. So b'shvil Yisrael. So therefore, the whole purpose of the Sheva mitzvahs, the universal mitzvahs and laws that are applied to the whole world, also they're commanded, but the reason for the commandment is not for the reward of the mitzvah itself. When we do a mitzvah, the reward is just naturally the mitzvah itself. We got to connect to Hashem through this mitzvah and do something that He asked us to do. We're carrying out the big mission. So we get the reward is the mitzvah itself. By the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach, when nations of the world do a mitzvah, the reward, they get a reward, because the mitzvah they're doing is for a greater purpose, right? And it's for the purpose of that is carried out by the Jewish people. And it's explained in depth. The nation that lived in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan, it was called. When we left Eretz Yisrael, it was a family, right? Yosef left, then his father and his brothers and sisters and their wives came. That means at the time the Jewish people left Eretz Yisrael, it was a family. This is a whole big piece of land, at least bigger than the needs of one family. So in order to facilitate that the land itself remain an inhabitable land, Hashem made it was necessary for people to live there, keep it inhabitable. And so too, that's the whole explanation of the whole world, that the whole world has to be inhabited. It has to be kept. We are the stewards of the world, of the earth, right? All of mankind, right? So kedei Jeden sollen kennen machen von der Welt adira vor dem Ebersten durch Jedens kiyum ha-Torah va-mitzvos. So the nations of the world make the world a house, and then our job is to make it a home for Hashem, this house. So that we are all building this mission. We're all in this mission of making a home for Hashem. And the nations of the world facilitate the building of the house, and we continue that mission with making it a home for Hashem, right? Like a wife, they say that the house, husband builds a house or gets a house, but it's a wife that makes it a home. We're the wife of Hashem, and therefore we're the homemaker.
Very quick question here. Do the nations of the world know what their role is in all of this?
That's our job.
Because it seems to me as though that the Jews, know what the non-Jews' roles are. But I mean, but do the non-Jews know that they play a part in all of this? I'm not sure if I could understand or appreciate if they understand that.
It's a good question.
I mean, and when you look at the non-Jews, remember they are of different races, different religions, different thought processes. So are we saying that there's a unanimity in all of these different groups that they are playing a part to build a house here? I'm not seeing that.
So whether or not they realize that it's for the purpose of this mission that Hashem gave to the Jews or not is maybe not necessarily recognized, right, by them. But the Rebbe tells us that we're supposed to, and not just the Rebbe, it's known that we're supposed to inform the world that we have to make this world a home for Hashem. We have to inspire the nations, the whole world, to live righteously. Now, for them, there's 7 laws of humanity that leads to their living righteous and creating this house for Hashem. By us, that's a little bit more nuanced and complex. But the whole point is to convince them of living this righteous lifestyle of the Sheva Mitzvahs in order to do this. So somebody asked the Rambam, if the Jews is right, if the Torah is right and everything like that, then why did the Notzri come? Why did the Mohammedan come, right? Why did Christianity and Islam come? And the Rambam says, in order to smooth the way for Mashiach, that the rest of the world, because of the Notzri and because of the Mohammedan, they, or the Ishmaelite, I think he called them, the whole world, or most of the world, now has this connection and understanding and a relationship with Hashem, the coming of Mashiach, and the whole picture. In fact, their text even involves the Jewish people, and they understand that. So in order to sort of place the superiority on them or whatever it is, they said what they had to say, but there's no denying the origin of it and the main goal, which is is to live righteous in order to facilitate a godly place for Hashem. So they know it, but they don't know it. And it's our job to make them know it, but at the very least, we should inspire them to just do the job, right? So like Yeshua and Caleb, either we just tell them, let's just go anyway, just build, or we explain to them why. Don't rebel against Hashem, and you have nothing to fear. We need to do the same thing with the nations. And he goes in even deeper to kind of explain it in a deeper way. It's a good question because he touches on this. So in the River is euch der Schar v'einisch auf the Zayin mitzvahs as mesuba tivi on lamata was kommt mit derech memela von zer tachlis. So too, we could say that the reward or punishment for the 7 mitzvahs is something that happens naturally down here as a result of the actions that they do, right? That's why we can say, in general, there's no generally speaking, there's no concept of punishment by the idol worshippers. Misa. There's many punishments in Torah, right? The many punishments in Torah. You do this, you get this many lashes, you do this, you have to pay that, you have to, all these things. As it pertains to the Sheva Mitzvahs, there are many halachas that fit kind of within that. So establishing a court system, being one of the Sheva Mitzvahs, having justice in your land. There are many details within that one mitzvah, but they're all applicable. However, breaking entirely a single Sheva, one of these Sheva Mitzvahs, the punishment or the result in all cases for all of the 7 is Misa. It's death. It's a death penalty. Because the same thing as we said about the creatures, all creatures and creations of Hashem, we say over here by idol worshippers, nit by itself. It's not like a shadow where the shadow is a reaction to the movement and the actions that a person does. It's not like that. There's one singular thing that happens if something is ruined. I mentioned before about the by Dinah and the whole thing. Why could the brothers go and kill the whole nation? They said, their son, the son who assaulted Dinah, the king comes and says, my son wants to marry her. And Yaakov says, she can't marry somebody not circumcised. So all the men in that nation get circumcised, and then the two brothers go in and wipe everybody out. So the question is, how could they do this? What was the justification? And the justification is that one of the Sheva mitzvahs, which had been given by then already, is to establish a justice system. And because this whole nation had not held this young man accountable for his actions, they were all chayav misa. They were all liable to death penalty. So these two brothers had what to hold on. They went through and wiped everybody out. Al pi Torah, they could do it. Right? So unindem bashtei, the chiluk b'pnimius in Yonah v'gam al derech ha'alacha tzvishen debate the pirushim in Rashi. So we could see in Chassidus this whole concept between these two explanations in Rashi. So the erste pirush is kashitas haravid. The first explanation in Rashi was like the Ravid. As b'nei noyach zayne begeder heder, where they're like air. Und the schar v'einish by zeh is an inyan haba k'toitzah b'derech memela canal, where the punishment or anything that happens to them is a reaction to it. It happens naturally. It's not a result of, right? Und der Rebbe lernt as the pirush von Tzilam is nit Tzilo shalamakom, nor magina v'chazkam shalahem. Therefore, we could say, according to the Ravid, that Rashi's first explanation, that the protective shadow is specific to the nation and not the protective shadow of Hashem, nor magina v'chazkam shalahem, that it's theirs, right? Based on the righteous that live there. Vertin zeh achayzet. And that's who gives them this strength, is the righteous amongst them. Thus is aber nit kein inyan was zetoyin oif l'mayla. We can't say about them that they caused something to happen on high. Masha enkin the zweite pirush from Rashi is kashitas harambam. But the second explanation, that it's the shadow of Hashem, is like of Rashi. Sorry, the second explanation of Rashi is like the Rambam. As a zayin begeder mitzias, that they do have a mitzias, v'yesh behem geder hashgacha pratis, so they do have hashgacha pratis, and they do have an effect, right, on a high. Unchach as oich das Rambam is the mitzias from bnei noyach, und azoi oich zayin mitzvos shalahem, and since we would say like Harambam, that they have a mitzias, the bnei noyach have a mitzias. And also they have the 7 mitzvahs. And also there's an effect. B'shvil Yisrael is for the purpose of the mission of the Jewish people. Given oif the mitzvahs, ubefrat as the zayin mitzvahs tzivu b'hen HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah v'hoidiyanu al-yidei Moshe Rabbeinu. Darf man sagen, as durch zer mekayim zayin dem tzivu von Eberstein pa'ulen ze dugmasei hamshachal melamayla. Therefore, we have to explain to them the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach, these laws that you do that are 7 laws of humanity, right? Don't steal, don't kill, family values, have a justice system, these things that you think you're doing because they just make sense, because this is just the way you have to be as a human. When you teach them, the nations, that may be true, but Hashem wants you to do it. So those things that you see as just being a natural way that humanity should behave, recognize that there is an all-encompassing existence known as Hashem that lives in everything and breathes everything and gave us our existence. And Hashem wants you to live this way. When they recognize that the things that they do because they see as being right and just were given to them by Hashem, it changes their whole perspective, because you then can say you not only have an effect in this world when you do the things that you consider right and just, but these things were told to your ancestors and mine by Hashem, the creator of the world. So when you do them, not only do they affect the world, but they have an effect on the heavens as well. Right? So Ubamela is by Zay Shaykh to Zagan as Sila Shalamakum. You can say about them that it was the protective shadow of Hashem. Ver Nimshach Alehem Ba'efin Funatzel, Sir Prati, Bizer Ver Ungeruf and Sila. You can say even about the Tzel Shalakadosh Sila Shalamakum, that the shadow of Hashem is Tzilam, is their shadow. That's why Rashi brings both explanations, because they're both Shaykh to the nations. Al pi ze vet men noch besser verstehen da as baras atmia in hemshech aksuvim upirish Rashi. And therefore, based on this, we can explain even better the continuation in the writing of Rashi, that he says on them, that the Sar Tzilam, their protective shadow, was departed from them, right? Is muchrach. The fact that it says if Hashem wants is proof that oich altim roidu al tiru, that not to rebel leads to you won't fear them. Rashi mafarish given as ba Hashem altim roidu, that it's in Hashem not to rebel. Undemo v'shuv, and in return va'atim al tiru, in return from not rebelling you won't fear, right? Canal as men gate b'koichei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this strength comes from Hashem. This is the strength of Hashem. It's klal nit shayich oich api teva. It's not necessarily relevant according to the laws of nature. So moira haben fardem, to have fear on haaretz, on the nation. Unkri lachamenu he. And when it says, because they are our bread, noichlam kalechem, we consume them like bread, as the Eibishter werd ze geben zu Yidden b'derech chiva, upanim meiros, that he gives them to us happily, right? Is das als mevar de matze wie Yidden darfen sein, is because of the situation and the position that the Jews find themselves in. Them losing their shadow is because of what they do. Our having Hashem is because of what we do and who we are. Was ist aber neged zu Moidia sein, was ist tut sich mit dem Am haaretz asar tzilam me'alehem. So then we have to explain what is the connection of knowing, or what's the point of knowing the fact that their protective shadow has been removed from them. B'signon acher ksas is written in this particular style. Im chavetz banu Hashem, if Hashem desires, v'nasnu lanu, to give to us, un b'Hashem atim roidu, if you don't rebel against Hashem, is was is negeh yidden zu wissen was es tut sich mit Zilom. What's the relevance of needing to know what's going on with their shadow, their protection? Vibadas neichlam, and consents neichlam that will consume them is ma'atzmai moving, as this is nita kain magen v'teikev, is my kamashmalon sar tzilom. As my moving as is nita kain magen v'teikev is my kamashmalon sar tzilom, and in itself is known or understood that it's not about their protective. So what's the difference of knowing whether or not, what's the relevance in knowing about Sar Tzilam, the departure of their protection? So for was haben sie noch einmal übergesagt al tiru? What's the point of then having to repeat again al tiru, don't fear them? Yisurimizu, and furthermore, zog as this is genug as al timroidu. It should have been enough that they said al timroidu, don't rebel, that b'meila, and naturally v'shuv, in return zayin al tiru, they won't fear. Do is meisif atam v'Hashem itanu. Instead they add a point and say v'Hashem itanu, Hashem is with us. Is the beer in them? The explanation in them is like this: V'kivish am haaretz is given drei sugim. When it came to the destruction of these three people, or of the nations, there were three situations. Meisim, v'gershtamu, gleich batel legamre, and agarshenu nach dem as tifra und inzwischen seinen sie gewähren avadim, b'chule lachamenu. That there were three different types. There were people that died, there were people that were lost entirely, and then there were people that moved, right? They were in between, they moved. And the continuation of this is afilu leit zweiten Peters from Rashi, as by almost ha'elam is da tzilish olamako. And even according to this second opinion of Rashi, the second example, where they have the shadow of Hashem protecting them, kashitas harambam, like the example, or like the opinion of Rambam, as yesh bahem geder hashgacha pratis, that they do have divine intervention. Is doch aber moving pashtus is explained simply as das is klalu klal nid wie the hashgacha pratis of Yidden, is not necessarily the same type or level of hashgacha pratis, divine intervention, that the Jews have. Ukanal as the mitzvahs from Yidden is the kavana in ze'alein. The whole point of the mitzvahs that we do is for the mitzvah itself, right? When we do a mitzvah, the mitzvah itself is the purpose. It's not for our own reward or some secondary thing. The mitzvah needed to be done for the sake of Hashem. So we do it. And this is why Yeshua and Kalev emphasize this. They start by saying the strength of the nations. They said about this, they said, in Hashem, don't rebel. And in return, you will have no reason to fear the nation. You'll have no reason to fear them. It doesn't matter what situation they're holding in. Therefore, it goes further and adds, furthermore, their protective shadow is removed from them. It's not according to this first explanation in Rashi, that this shield and strength, it's based on the other, that it's the shadow of Hashem that has removed from them. Hashem is nori tanu, and furthermore, that Hashem is with us. Hashem itanu. The opposite of the shadow departing, right? It's not to say that we're lacking the shadow of Hashem. It's not about the tzilei shalamakom. Hashem itanu, it says about us. Hashem is with us, right? Nor Hashem itanu, das heißt, bei Umas ha'olam is the hashkacha von Eibishtin euch ben sein. Specifically, Hashem's hashgacha, the divine intervention as it pertains to the nations of the world, is like a shadow. It hovers, it's over them, even when it's protecting, it's over and outside. Right? Aber by Yidden is the Eibishter nit nor b'v'chinas makif, but by the Yidden, it's not over us like in this encompassing, nor oich itanu, rather it's also with us. Hashem is with us. Mit sein hashgacha is sich misyached mit uns, that it's one with us. Hashem is one with us, right? Is mamela moving as das bring nit nor altiru as art. So it doesn't just say don't fear the nation, nor oich altirum. It adds don't fear them. Stam nit no, don't fear. Right? Don't fear them, the nation, but also don't fear them. Stop. It's not just don't fear that nation in there because Hashem wants to give us that land. Rather, that they're like bread, our bread. Nor is because it's not even about it's whether or not they even have a metzias the gamre. And this goes, then we can look at the three types of people that they left. They didn't even survive. Also shalom and there were people that stayed and helped and served. Gergoshu, Pina, the Afriki, and then there were even the Girgashi who went to Africa, and there's a story about them in the Gemara as they came to Alexander the Great and tried to get this. There's a whole thing in there. But this is the other people that ran. They went to Africa and then tried to come back later, much later. Und Seif is that they're noch gekommen beteine v'chule und Yidden haben bekommen shedesehen k'shehen zrei osam ukarmeihem k'shehen u'ta'os. So this is the whole point, that at the end of the day, we are not supposed to fear anybody, anything other than Hashem, while the others might have their shadow, whether it be their own merit or even the shadow of Hashem, either shita that we hold by. But when it comes to the Yidden, Hashem itanu, and therefore not only al tiru am haaretz, but also al tirum stam. We shouldn't fear anybody because Hashem itanu.